Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unique Careers in Tech. I hope y'all have been enjoying your Global Hack Week so far. I know I've been really enjoying getting to see all the other coaches' streams, talking about so many different topics within careers. I love getting to see everyone's spin on everything. Looks like we have a good amount of people in the chat. Love to see it. Excited to talk about unique careers in tech, as well as kind of like unique pathways into tech as well. It's something that I'm super interested in. Um, and kind of similar to last time, if you're curious to look at the slides on this presentation, you want to reference them later, you can go to this bit.ly link, and I'll have that at the end as well if you want to follow along like afterwards. Okay, so we're going to dive into like a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we'll have a brief introduction to kind of like unique tech careers, as well as the like overall tech landscape, presently, kind of like what we're looking at currently, and then diving into more of those core engineering skills, exploring the differences between traditional and unique careers and kind of what is the difference between those and kind of the elements like where roles have like bled over into like more of a mixture of a role or a pathway. Then we'll dive a little bit more into those unconventional paths in a tech. I'll be doing a few case studies on kind of the different pathways and different roles that are a little bit more unique. And then I'll be talking more about those specific unique roles, kind of like how you can find them, and highlighting a few that I'm interested in and like to talk about. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. If you're curious about building your own unique pathway into tech, your own unique career, or just have more questions about kind of what I covered in general. All right, let's get started. So my name is Gabriella. I'm a coach here at Major League Hacking, and I take a lot of coding classes, but I don't want to be a software engineer long term. I might like work as a software engineer for a few years after graduation, but ideally, I'd like to see myself in a role in a few years where I'm mixing kind of my technical skills with more of my product design and kind of strategy thinking. I think that like a blend of all of those different skill sets within the technology space is kind of where I'd like to see myself in a few years, and I find that that kind of work to be the most interesting. And if anyone is like I guess like interested in like talking more about that, we can pop some questions in the chat, and I'll talk about that as we go through this. It's a little bit more about the current tech landscape. I'm going to focus specifically on kind of like how machine learning is changing the current tech landscape, like how that looks in the current tech landscape, as well as the current changing state of work. Of course, there's like a lot of different like types of like aspects of the current tech landscape, and like a lot of different things that kind of influence that. But these are like what I'm going to focus on today. We could honestly talk like for like hours on end about the current tech landscape and all the different aspects of it. But this is what I'm knowledgeable about and like what I'm interested in. So kind of first I want to talk about like how machine learning is affecting our current tech landscape. Something we're seeing is that machine learning is able to kind of automate the fluff out of jobs. So if you think of like those like very manual tasks, those very kind of like boring, tedious tasks in your job, where like it's kind of like the same repetitive task over and over again. If you were able to kind of get rid of that, I think in like most cases, people would be grateful for that, especially if they have other tasks in their job that are more like intellectually stimulating, more relevant to actually getting like work done or like meeting deliverables. If they were able to kind of cut down the time needed for that, I think a lot of people would appreciate that. But there's kind of, I guess, like the line between are you just like automating the fluff out of a job versus automating workers out of jobs? And I think like that is going to happen kind of as we like like better increase the models and implement things across industry. That happens like as kind of innovation occurs, like regardless of industry. We saw people like as early as like the industrial age, like being automated out of jobs, like as we began to see like beginnings of like technology as a whole, not just like digital technology. And that's something we'll kind of see. But I think like what is interesting specifically for tech workers is that it provides like the ability to focus more on your kind of core tasks and freeing up like more time and like mental energy to work on the more impactful aspects of your job, and like removing those kind of like fluff or like just like tedious tasks, which I think is very interesting and kind of can allow for more creativity and innovation because you're not spending hours on end doing data entry, manual analysis, or like managing different aspects of like an email list, something like that, which are all like pretty common, I think, tasks for like different office jobs depending on the role. And I think that kind of like in conjunction with this, machine learning models are going to be used to create more efficient workflows. We can kind of already see this with people implementing like slight automation into their everyday lives. I know when I needed to create reports in the past, and it was very tedious, I ended up just spending a few hours to make a Python script that where like I could just like upload the data and it would like spit out the report in like a few minutes for me, and that saved me literal hours off my life because I was able to make that, and that made my workflow more efficient because I could spend more time on like the things that required more mental energy, kind of like innovating in other ways. And I think that these models will kind of, as a whole, allow us to create more efficient workflows, both like individually, but also like as a team, where you're able to kind of automate away like specific aspects of your team process or project management that can be kind of improved and just making the team like a better, more nimble, as well as just like allowing for more time to work on those projects that um, are more impactful and freeing up more just like mental space to like think about them more deeply. So you're able to, I guess, like just like work on problems like a little bit more intelligently versus just like spending hours and hours on end, kind of doing like the manual, tedious tasks, which I think will be like very interesting, specifically in like those unique tech careers where you're combining that creativity with like your technical skills. And something we're also starting to see more and more is the evolving ethical considerations surrounding the applications of machine learning models and kind of the data protections that are needed. These have, I feel like, have been questions like we've been asking since like the internet has been very mainstream, and there's a lot of activity going on these websites using these algorithms. But I think like more recently, because of like the emergence of just like more language based machine learning models, this leads to more ethical considerations on education, kind of like I guess, the difference between plagiarism versus just like using these models to like assist you with research or assist you with your planning process, and then utilizing those resources to create your own work, um, and kind of also how we train these models to begin with is also like a very big consideration that I feel like is weighing pretty heavily on the tech landscape and will, I think, lead to like new kind of like unique tech careers of people who are like maybe auditing these systems, or potentially also in the future, like when more regulations have come out, like the compliance aspect of this in the future. I guess like similar to something like the FDA or other regulatory institutions, but specifically for technology and like aspects of this. I can definitely see like that being more stratified in the future once it like becomes more mainstream and more elected officials have like, I guess, like a deeper knowledge of this and like the legislation gets passed. Next thing I'm going to like dive into is kind of like how like the current state of work is like changing pretty rapidly. And there's also like a few like questions that are kind of weighing on both workers and employers alike, kind of presently. Um, so something we've kind of seen is like a rise within like the gig economy and gig workers. So this can, I guess, like both be something that like people, I guess, typically associate with the gig economy of picking up short tasks through like apps, something like that you've seen like things like Instacart, like delivery services, um, or what I guess like wow, how I'm seeing it more in like the tech industry itself is more companies moving towards kind of like contract or consultant based tech workers. Actually, one of my first coworkers, like when I was still pretty early in university, he was working as a full time software engineer. Um, and he said that he really like recommended and kind of honestly thought that it would like most software engineers should start off working on a contract basis. So they were able to test out a few different like companies, tech stacks, and were able to kind of stack things as well. This is interesting because it can be helpful to both employers and employees alike. Depending on how it's implemented, of course, it's cheaper and less risky for larger companies to be holding on to employees on a contract basis, where they have the option to either not renew contracts of workers or end those contracts earlier. And there's like less regulations, at least within the US, like pertaining to like kind of like how severance and like layoffs work in that aspect. But for employees, that can be very helpful in that if they're able to take on multiple of these contracts or consultancies, they're able to kind of diversify their experiences, have like more control over their time, as well as kind of like hedging their bets If like multiple of these clients, like it's not like full-time work at each client, but maybe 10 to 20 hours at like maybe 1 to 2 to 3 clients, they're able to have like the diversity of the skill set, the clients itself, and also hedging their bets in like the instance of like when layoffs or like in the case of contract workers, just like contracts not getting renewed, they're able to have other streams of income and also have more control as I guess like typically when I guess depending on the structure of the contracts they're taking on, they're able to have more control and just be in there to complete their work. And it is, doesn't not getting involved too much in office politics, as well as treating the companies as their clients versus like just like viewing themselves like as an employee of the overall like institution. But of course, there are, I guess, like pros and cons to this, specifically within the US. There's like concerns about retirement and 401k slash retirement benefits, which sometimes can be like kind of accounted for as a lot of these like consultancy and contract workers are like hired at like more inflated rates. They're able to kind of work through, I think, those considerations on their own, able to contribute more to retirement on their own, or pay like out of pocket for their own health insurance within the US if like their rate is like at a high enough level. But if these rates are not kind of like inflated, like in these kind of considerations, that can be an issue. Other contracts as well do offer these benefits that traditional workers have. My previous coworker, who had only typically worked on a contract basis as a software engineer, had health insurance or retirement benefits through kind of the like agency that was outsourcing him. But in other instances, you can kind of create that yourself as an entity if you're, I guess, like interested in more autonomy. But again, that's typically something that will happen as like you progress in your career. Someone asked, what do you mean by retiring in 401k? This, I didn't mean to word it exactly like that. But essentially, for anyone who is not an American viewer or just doesn't know that much about retirement accounts, a 401k is a tax advantaged retirement account within the US. And this is often offered by employers as a way to kind of incentivize them to come work for them. They'll like match your contributions. It's like a whole another topic as like the retirement accounts and kind of retirement system like within the US, but kind of like for now, 401k is a American tax advantage retirement account. And you're able to set those up in like various different ways through employers or as a gig worker. Yes. Okay. So that was like kind of long-winded like explanation of the gig economy, gig workers, and kind of like how that's changing how we view work. I can definitely see like in the future, many more workers kind of working on a contract or consultancy basis, having multiple clients of different companies versus most people working at a 9 to 5. I think that'll probably be like a while before that is the norm, but I can see it kind of becoming more popular both among my peers as well as like people older than me who are kind of seeking more control in this current like tech landscape. I think this also allows you to take on different roles. If you want to take on one contract that's within software engineering, one that's a technical writer, right, like you're able to kind of like diversify your experience, and maybe your contract ends for the technical writer. You decide to pick up another software engineering position, maybe in a different tech stack, depending on how many hours each of these require. Some of them are also like deliverable based. So if you're able to like get the deliverables done in 10 hours, you're able to pick up other work if you desire, or if you have family considerations, other things going on. Maybe you could have a period of time where you're not picking up as many contracts or consultancies. It allows for more flexibility, but there are definite cons to this, as it's can be less stable and more difficult to find these positions depending on the job market. But there's pros and cons to both sides, as there are with everything. But kind of like also within the changing state of work, something that's pretty present with a lot of workers is kind of the ability to have like that we have the technology for remote work and remote collaboration for most positions. I'd say most positions have the ability to be at least somewhat remote, at least like a hybrid kind of situation. This, of course, like depends on like your specific role and like the industry you're working in. But I'd say for digital technology itself, I'd say this is one of the industries like where we have kind of like the most ability to do this. I think a lot of office workers themselves are able to like there's the technology for this as well, even if they aren't technical workers. But there seems to be more of a push for return to office mandates. A lot of different companies, you can see this with a lot of like the large tech companies pushing to at least a few days in office every week for their workers. Some like companies are pushing to like a full return back to office, like the traditional 5-day work week. Um, and this could be like for a variety of reasons. Some people believe that having the in-person presence is better for collaboration, better for teams. They believe it's more productive. I'd argue in some instances that it's just because the companies are stuck in real estate contracts for large office buildings. But I do think in some cases it can be helpful to have that in-person collaboration element. But I think it's interesting because there are some tech workers who are just like refusing to go back to the office and deciding to get a different job rather than returning to the office with their current company. But we do see this kind of more happening more frequently as kind of the tide is changing from the power primarily being in the hands of employees, as it has been for like it was for a brief period. Is beginning to shift back to companies having more power as the job market gets more competitive, as well as just like not as many openings for workers as a whole, specifically within the tech industry, as we saw like those thousands of layoffs. There's just like more of a power imbalance has been shifted since then. And this is interesting to kind of see how this plays out, as well as how much, I guess, like in person collaboration and work is needed. I have been, I guess, like at like other positions, like in office, like on like a Zoom call with people who are not in the physical building or maybe like a few stories up. And that seems a little silly sometimes to me. Um, but in other instances, maybe you do actually need to be in person for some in-person collaboration, or if you're working on something on site that's necessary, like that can happen. So there's definitely, I guess, like a bit of a spectrum with this, and it's interesting to see like how people value this and how like the flexibility that a lot of office workers gained during COVID with remote work are looking to kind of retain that like through the pandemic and into the future. Um, and another thing we're seeing in kind of like the altering and rapidly changing state of work is that a lot of role responsibilities are beginning to shift as things like machine learning models are being like integrated into like everyday work, whether that be for technical workers like software engineers or non-technical workers who are just having kind of like the more like manual tasks like be automated. We're seeing some time be freed up, kind of like I talked about earlier, for like having that time, mental energy to innovate and work on other tasks. I think this will be interesting as it can maybe allow for some more creativity in technical roles where they had to work on like a lot of manual code, or non-technical roles who are maybe spending a lot of times like tediously like altering reports. And I'm very interested to kind of see like how positions kind of merge or change altogether as like we see like more of this innovation allowing for more time and energy to be spent in other tasks and maybe more intellectually stimulating tasks as well. That's like a little bit of an overview on the current tech landscape. What I find interesting, there's also just like a million other trends. This is kind of what I'm going to focus on for today. So now we're going to kind of dive into some of the core engineering skills for kind of like a tech career, whether that be in a technical role or a non-technical role, like just within the tech industry. A lot of them are pretty similar to the skills that you'll need for traditional like engineering or technical careers: data analysis and like literacy, being able to comb through those different data sets, those like data visualizations and reports, and being able to understand like what it's saying and like what those insights mean for your company, for your organization, for like the problem at hand is very important and will be important for like a lot of different roles you can have, even if you're not an engineer or a data scientist. Those skills will be important for strategy, for business operations, kind of like across the board. That is a very useful skill. And if you're not quite sure where you like want to fall in tech and like what kind of role you want, I think this is a pretty good skill set to build out, to have kind of in your back pocket. I think that also just like coding in general is like a very good skill to have, even if you're not working a technical career, to have that knowledge and to understand like how the programs work, and how kind of like everything is like architected and functioning, I think is very important, especially if you're working on the business or like sales side of things. If you're able to kind of talk in depth about how things function, and kind of like the future of the product, I think that is very helpful because you're able to have that like deep understanding and kind of translate how it's operating to people who maybe don't have that same technical background. And I think it's a very important skill to have, and I think it's very needed. Kind of going off of that, the ability to have clear and concise communication is like a very needed skill within the tech industry. And you're able to kind of use your previous technical background and your communication skills to educate people, to really get your point across, as well as show like how something is functioning, and how like how it's relevant to the business proposition, and like it just like makes you a better candidate. It proves an asset in like a lot of different roles because you're able to clearly communicate. You're able to clearly communicate both like through like technical findings, but as well like on your team, to like other people within the organization, maybe outside the organization. Here, like this clear communication is very important. Kind of like also bouncing off that, management skills are another, I think, like important skill to have, whether you're just like in tech or working as an engineer, both specifically like on a team. So if you're working on a team that has a lot of different products, a lot of different moving pieces, being able to manage those and kind of keep a bird's eye view of all of that, I think is very important. Providing the support that your team needs, as well as the resources if needed, and being able to kind of like hold your team accountable as you progress through the different projects, but also kind of a more micro level on those individual projects and asking those questions, I think is important when you're managing everything and trying to make sure the product gets out and it's accomplishing like kind of the goals you set in the beginning. I think that kind of also kind of connected to the project and team management. Critical thinking is a very good kind of core skill across the like the board for a lot of different jobs you're going to have, but in tech it's very important. But I think that like having like very like critical thinking skills, specifically in the areas of business and operations, for kind of like how to scale and maintain these different technical products, these different applications, as well as the company as a whole, but also specifically like on the product itself, thinking through kind of like how the user is going to navigate through something. Is this actually solving the problem? And like how can we continue to improve this? Are there like anything, is there anything else in the market that we can kind of like add to compete with any like outside competitors and kind of make our product very usable and up to date, like across the board. Networking and security knowledge is also like a very big asset to like any role. Kind of similar to coding, if you just like understand how things are functioning and you have that base round, like that base level knowledge, it's going to be very helpful. And also specifically security, having like an idea of how to keep your application secure, and kind of the first steps to take in an instance like where you have a breach or there's like vulnerabilities. I think that like having that, even if that's not your entire job, is something like good to have as a background, because even if you're not like working on the entire like security team for an application, if you can point out kind of very obvious or maybe not so obvious, like areas where there might be vulnerabilities or things need to be thought about a little bit more deeply, you're able to ask those questions and kind of jump in based on your previous knowledge. And kind of finally, I think that adaptability and as well as like the ability to continue learning like throughout your entire career are super important within tech and engineering because things are so like rapidly changing. So even if you have like a very solid foundation of engineering, you have great experience in whatever tech realm like your specialty is in, if you don't continue to learn and like adapt to kind of the changes of the current like evolving market, your like role is going to like get left behind and you're not going to be like that competitive of an applicant as well as like being able to get your work done. Quite frankly, if you're not able to like keep up with like the updates as well as kind of the emerging trends within your field. And I think this applies to both like as like a software engineer on a security team or even working on product as well. Okay, it looks like we have a few comments here. Someone said, I'm not really good with the technical stuff, but I helped a lot of my friends with management skills. And this is great to kind of see like where your strengths lie on this page, because you're not going to be 100% at every single skill that I listed on this page, but having kind of like an area like where you're pretty good at, and then building out those other skills to some kind of like minimal or medium level, I think is going to make you like a great like have a like a great position in your career, as well as be able to kind of like serve as an asset to your team. Because I can't tell you like the number of times I've worked on a team like where they can't communicate and like the management is an issue. And if you have those skills, but maybe aren't as good at coding or don't have as much security knowledge as the rest of the team, like you'll be able to work well together because of the people who have those technical, like those deeper technical skills are able to kind of like function better on a team because they have someone who is communicating well or managing things in a very like efficient and kind of like easy to interact with way. Someone else said that having empathy with others and understanding the needs of the users and how to form a solution is key. Yes, I think like definitely like asking like pointed and informed questions is a super important part of engineering and tech careers in general, because being able to write a bunch of code and debug it or respond to security threats is one thing. Being able to think about it more clearly kind of during the process, I think is also really important, and it can allow you to pivot and make adjustments like a little bit earlier than if you're just acting as a reactionary, you're just building out a complete tech stack, but more thinking about what problem is this like actually solving, and is there anything like we're kind of missing in our process. In most cases, you're probably going to miss something. I think that happens like 99% of the time. You're not going to think of every like possible use case or every like possible problem. But if you're asking these questions to begin with, I think it shows that you're very proactive and will really kind of like make a better team and more efficient team, as well as just like better products overall that are more suited to kind of interact with society as a whole. So now I'm going to kind of dive into the difference between a traditional versus unique career. And of course, there's kind of like a bleed over between these two. There's some roles that kind of fall in the middle. There's some traditional roles like where you're like utilizing like one like particularly like unique or emerging skill, and there's some like unique careers like where you have a very like traditional aspect of your job as well. That's not like too cut and dry, but I feel like it's more of like a spectrum between these two types of careers. So something that you can kind of see is that um, traditional like careers in tech, something like someone like a software engineer, a system administrator, IT support specialist, database admins, network engineers, like just like a lot of different kind of like what you think of when you think of the tech industry, those very technical people who like are building out like a lot of these applications. And these careers have an emphasis on existing technologies, existing like problems. They have a very defined career path. And also they have a very heavy focus on maintaining and optimizing like these existing systems. Most of the time, these traditional careers are going to be like kind of like established, are going to kind of occur at a large or established organization, or if it's not, super established is going to be more larger, like a more large institution with kind of like existing problems. A lot of your focus is going to be on like maintaining and optimizing an existing system versus kind of thinking out an entirely new system. And of course, there are software engineers working on like a startup or like a more like research focused environment. And that's kind of like a role where you have like a mix of more of that traditional versus unique career. And someone who is in a unique or emerging technical career would be someone like a digital anthropologist, AR developers, ethical hackers, drone operators, data scientists who don't work in tech. So think of like a data scientist at like the CDC, a data scientist working for a newsroom, and also a like kind of like unique and emerging career is a developer advocate, which I'll kind of dive into later. And kind of like the core characteristics of a unique or emerging career in tech is that they're focusing on new and emerging technologies. They're thinking about unconventional applications of technology, kind of like unconventional or new problem spaces that haven't really been thought through before, or kind of like just like kind of like new trends within the tech space. A lot of people who work in these emerging roles have like an interdisciplinary career path. They have a focus maybe in a few different areas, and they like to kind of focus on the intersections of those areas. A lot of the times they're going to have a non-linear career path because if you have a lot of different focuses, you're going to need to have time to gain experience as an engineer, gain experience in biology, gain experience like as a journalist, like those types of things. So kind of like non-linear, kind of bouncing around from different interests and different like tasks as well. You'll also see a big focus on innovation in these careers and kind of like changing how things are currently working, thinking out like the new technologies, new ideas versus that maintaining. You'll see in traditional spaces. A lot of times these roles will be at startups, research organizations, smaller, newer companies, even like new kind of like labs or labs or subsections of a school. And these are kind of like at intersecting industries. For like tech roles, you'll see tech roles at kind of companies or emerging problem spaces within something like science, like specifically focused on like healthcare or journalism. You'll see things in government, kind of like those like interdisciplinary problem spaces, like where you need kind of like a little bit of domain knowledge in a lot of different areas. So these are kind of like the differences between traditional and unique careers. If anyone has any questions like so far, feel free to drop them down below. But as you can kind of see, it's a little bit more nebulous, not super cut and dry. But kind of like the main points is that traditional is more established, kind of like defined. Whereas with unique and emerging, you kind of get to define that for yourself and choose the things that you find interesting to focus on and to kind of carve out those positions. What are some position names that unique careers would be? So if you can see up on the top right, the first box, like a digital anthropologist, AR developers, developer advocate, a data scientist outside of tech, honestly, a software engineer working at a pretty small company that's not tech focused would be a unique career. Outside of that, I think there's like a bunch of different careers. There's like technical writers, people who focus on product. I think that's a pretty unique career, and you're able to go about that in like a lot of different ways. I think like user research is a pretty unique career, depending on like how you go about it, and kind of like how you would go about landing these sorts of roles. I think is going to look more at kind of like what these job descriptions are looking for, like those kind of skills, as well as thinking about like what kind of like the intersection of like what you're good at and what you're interested in, because kind of like there you're going to find an interesting problem space where it's like sustainable for you to be like in this career kind of like long term, but also something that you have like enough knowledge or expertise or just like are able to do things well. And you can go about like landing those sorts of roles that way. And I think like a good place to look is not in the places you would like typically look for a tech role, Um, I worked for the Journalism Institute at my school for a semester, and I found that job kind of randomly. It was typically meant for journalism students to be working in this role, but I just found it kind of like on my school's like job board, and it sounded interesting. And I wasn't, I guess, like the typical candidate for this, but because of that, I was able to provide like a really unique perspective. I was doing like journalism experiments the entire semester, and because of my background, I focused primarily on technology because that's what I know and that's what I was interested in. And I was able to bring kind of like a unique spin to this program of doing like journalism experiments because I focused so heavily on technology and I had the background to kind of dive more into like how you would go about implementing these technologies to a primarily non-technical audience. So I think just like finding random positions that sound interesting to you and being able to kind of use your background as an asset. And I think if you go through these roles, there's one in particular that sounds interesting to you, look at the job description, look at like what types of tasks or skills they're looking for, and see like which one of those you have and start to build them out in different areas. And then like kind of like experimenting with like a lot of different skills and projects is a great way to land yourself in a more innovative and kind of like unique career because you have like that variety of like a background and skill set. Um, I have found that like I enjoy doing work that's both technical but also pretty focused on education and writing, kind of like what I'm doing today. Because I really enjoyed writing through like most of high school and then gained experience with technology in late high school and through university. So kind of seeing like what like where you have experience outside of tech and kind of leveraging those skills to either find a position that's more interesting to you and you really enjoy, or maybe even building out that position. If it's at like a smaller company or organization, there's been places where I've worked where there was problems that weren't being solved that I noticed because of my background, and I just kind of started solving them on the clock when I didn't have like other work to be doing. And I think that's also like a great way to kind of build out your own unique career, but that's also like not always possible if the company is like a little bit bigger. I hope that answered your question. So I'm gonna kind of dive more into this, like why one would choose either a traditional or a unique career. So like one of the biggest pros for a traditional, more well-defined career is because of that structure and stability. For a lot of folks who are looking to have like more of a defined path and need that structure in their day-to-day life, I think that a traditional career like is like a very good option, and also the stability that having a job where there's going to be software engineering openings at like a bunch of different companies across the board because they need them provides more of a stability than a very niche kind of problem set. So if you lose your job or the tech industry isn't like as a whole isn't doing great, they're still going to need like engineers to work on digital technologies at things like banks, at hospitals, and like at like a lot of different places that you wouldn't typically think of like when you think of software engineering. So I think those more traditional roles are good because it provides that stability and as well as a roadmap for your career. Kind of diving off of that, the industry breadth I think is a really, um, I guess like it's a pro for traditional careers because you're able to work as a software engineer at a tech company, at like Kellogg, at a bank, at like in the government, for smaller like university institutions. You're able to work like in that traditional role because they need those skills and like they're very in demand at like a lot of different places. So you have more security, like job security in that like ability and career security because you haven't niched down too much. If you're just like building websites on like a certain tech stack, yes, maybe like other companies aren't working that tech stack, but you have the skills to kind of apply yourself to like a lot of different positions. But because these skills are like so broad and also like so in demand, these are pretty foundational skills that can be transferred to like a lot of different roles. If you know Python really well, you can build like machine learning models, but you can also build a data dashboard for like a company that's like small and hasn't like optimized like their like operating information, which can lead you to unique careers, but is also like very, I guess, like important in coming from like I guess like a traditional role to like another traditional role is having those like pretty foundational transferable skills, but they can also be overlapped into an asset for unique or emerging careers. One of the pros for unique and emerging careers is the creativity that allows you to kind of exhibit. If you're able to kind of niche down into a specific area, you're able to be really creative in your day to day tasks. You're able to think about things in a unique way because you're more innovating things versus maintaining things, um, or just kind of like optimizing the existing systems. And you can, of course, apply some creativity in traditional jobs, but unique and emerging tech careers just offer you a little bit more freedom to like be more creative and a little bit more innovative in your day to day tasks. Your skill set, because you're working on so many different projects and so many different tasks within your role, can become more expansive and more of a holistic skill set. If you're working for a smaller company or if you're working kind of outside of the tech industry, your skill set becomes more than just I can code in this language, or I know a lot about I know a lot about cybersecurity and penetration testing. You have those technical skills in addition to I'm able to manage a cross-functional team. I'm able to document this thoroughly because no one else here knows how to code, and I need to explain like what's going on in the case that I'm not able to be here for a week or so, or I just need to explain to my manager like what I built, or I need to educate people about like how this product is changing our company or our like team, as well as like having those kind of like those like more holistic skills can be transferred within like a lot of different roles versus just those technical hard skills. And I think that in unique roles, you have to be very adaptable because you're typically working for a less established or kind of like a more niche area. And I think that makes you a very good candidate and a very good, like just like asset to your team because you're able to work on so many different tasks. You're able to pivot when necessary. But this can also be a very useful skill when working in a traditional role as well, because oftentimes you'll have those kind of the business like needs change and you'll need to pivot into working on a different application, or you'll need to focus more of your energy on security if there's a security breach, or you'll need to focus more of your energy on kind of documentation if you have a lot of new members joining your team because of a merger. So a lot of these skills can be used in both areas, but that's like a little bit of an overview of the pros of both types of careers, and how you would kind of like how they're implemented and what type of person like would typically choose these kind of two career paths, and if you're looking for something in particular, like how you might choose which path you go down. If you're looking for more of that stability and structure, going to a more traditional path might be for you. But if you're looking for more creative freedom in your day to day and more looking to niche down into like a very specific area with your interests, then a more of a unique or emerging role might be better for you. Now I'm going to have a little bit of an intermission. I know I've been talking about a lot of information. So go grab some water, take a stretch, take a minute away from your computer. I'm going to go grab some more water so I don't lose my voice. But I'll be back in about 2 minutes. So I'll see y'all then. All right, everyone, I'm back. I have my water, and we'll get started back into some more information on unique careers in tech. Um, I hope y'all are back, so we'll get started. So I'm going to kind of talk more about the difference between traditional versus unique entry into tech. We talked a little bit about unique versus traditional roles and kind of building out that niche or unique role for yourself. But some people want to just kind of work a traditional role, but don't have, I guess, the typical background of someone who's working as a software engineer, like cybersecurity professional, kind of those like traditional roles we talked about earlier. Those traditional entries kind of consist of higher education of some sort. Typically, these people would get a bachelor's in a quantitative field, and they'll pair it with some practical training. So this can be something like doing research on your campus and gaining like some project experience, just building some projects on your own while you're in college. Or maybe also you do an internship or two and you gain some practical experience in that way. Then after graduation, most of these candidates are able to kind of like find a traditional job based on their higher education, like focusing in something quantitative, such as statistics, mathematics, computer science, a different type of engineering. And then like using their focus with practical training are able to land a job like after they finish their university studies. But if you're someone who doesn't have that traditional background, maybe you didn't go to university, maybe you went to university, but you didn't go for a quantitative field, maybe you majored in something like English, social sciences, art, like there's a whole gamut of qualitative fields. But like for this like kind of like unique entry, this can happen like a lot of different ways, but it tends to focus heavily on the practical training and is typically completed a lot faster than university. So more traditional candidates, they may be in university anywhere from like 3 to 5 years, like including their time working on practical training. Whereas people who have more of that unique entry into tech typically are doing that through like self-teaching, through something like a boot camp. Maybe they're going to like a lot of hackathons and just building out a lot of projects. And then sometimes people do something called building in public, which I find to be pretty interesting, where they're building out a portfolio with a lot of different projects, but they're posting about it online, which can often gain the interest of engineering managers, hiring managers, like et cetera, at a different company where they may want to work for more of a traditional role. So here's kind of like the difference between like a traditional versus a unique entry into tech. This can be both into a traditional role or a unique role. But there's kind of pros and cons to both. The pros for traditional are that it's more defined, and because it's more established, it offers more options outside of tech. So if you get a degree in statistics, you get a degree in computer science, something like that. If you decide after graduation you don't want to work in tech, you have other options outside of that because it's more defined and more established. You're able to go work in other roles, like within business, a different role based on your previous experience pretty easily, and you're able to like leverage that a little bit more easily than you might be able to if you're coming from more of a unique background. And this more of like a traditional background develops critical thinking skills outside of the practical realm. So like while if you're self-teaching like how to like code JavaScript, you're definitely building critical thinking skills. But if you're going to kind of like an undergrad education, you're typically developing skills such as like essay writing or presentation skills, as well as just kind of like the overall like skills you gain over like a longer period of time versus you'll gain in like something like 6 months to a year, which is typically what we see with our candidates coming from a more of a unique background who are gaining that practical experience in about 6 months to a year. Something that going in through the traditional route or through university offers is also kind of a social development and network building aspect of college, where you're able to have the social development of being around your peers, at a young age, as well as the networking that you're able to do on campuses. And can be, I guess, like more or less beneficial depending on the type of institution you go to, as well as what types of activities you're involved in, what kinds of events you're going to. This can definitely be an asset later down the road in your life. Some cons of traditional entry into tech are that it's way more expensive, and there's the potential there for very steep debt depending on what kind of institution you go to, how much merit, like scholarships you're able to get versus how much aid you're able to get, and then whatever's left over that you'll have to pay out of pocket or take out loans to finance. And if you don't, I guess, make the most or able to like land a job out of university, this can be very difficult to pay back. Typically, in a traditional kind of pathway, there's a higher barrier to entry, both through kind of admissions to university as well as getting these degrees provides you access to certain companies and certain types of jobs that you may not be able to access as easily or at all if you have more of a unique background. This traditional entry is less flexible because it's more defined through your school's curriculum, your school's requirements, as well as maybe the requirements of your practical training or your job after graduation. It's typically a 3 to 4 year commitment. In some cases where you're going to a 4-year program and you take time off to do practical training, such as an internship, this can stretch out to about 5 years as well. For if you're kind of coming in through a unique or emerging background, a pro to this is that it's less defined. So you have more freedom to kind of tailor it to your unique interests as well as your unique needs. If you're only able to work at nights because you work during the day, or if you're only able to like work at certain like times, or you have family members or children to take care of, you're able to manage this a little bit easier than a traditional college degree. It's a much lower cost to enter through self-teaching, hackathons, or a boot camp, which can lead to a potential higher return on investment depending on what kind of job you're able to get after you finish your practical training. In some cases, it might cost more to go through the traditional route, but if you land a very high-paying job after graduation, it might be a higher ROA than going through a unique route. And also because there's less of a barrier to entry, you're able to more easily go into like a unique entry into tech. And there's more creativity through this because you're like defining more of your own path. You're able to kind of adjust it in areas where you're in, like to like accommodate for your interests, your needs, and it's more tailored closer to you. So it's kind of more an expression of your interest, as well as like the areas like where you want to go after graduation. I've kind of done this like myself, where I started to explore kind of like skill sets and kind of like the skill sets as well as the like technologies needed for particular roles that I'm like starting to explore like as interest for post-graduation that I'm not doing through my university. I'm just kind of doing them on my own. But if this is like a part of your practical training, coming from like a unique background, you're able to tailor it like closely to you and have that be like a part of like your own like developed curriculum, or if you're in a boot camp, it can be kind of part of your supplementary curriculum as well. These slides will be on a bit.ly link that I will show at the end of the presentation. That's on like the last slide. So you'll be able to access the slides afterwards. So don't worry about that. Also, like another pro of unique entry into tech is that it can help to diversify the industry, both through like kind of like demographics, but also in like the ways of have like a greater age and like geographic diversity from like people who are entering in a unique pathway. I completed a boot camp my senior year of high school, and most of the people going through this program, it was going to be their second or third career. They were like anywhere from like 27 to like 40. Some people were teachers. There was one person who had like an entire acting career, but wanted something that was like more stable on the side. And this can provide, I guess, like a lot more, I guess, like perspectives within tech, which I think is definitely a pro to like this unique entry into tech. Some of the cons about unique or emerging entry into tech is that you will have less options outside of tech due to the like very specific and practical nature because you're not developing those skill sets outside of this specific technology. You're not going to have like the same types of options as if you had gotten a computer science degree that gave you a little bit of domain knowledge in a bunch of different areas, or if you had gotten a statistics degree or mathematics degree that's more established and has kind of like a variety of things you can do after graduation. That's not necessarily the case for unique entry to tech. And often cases, people who enter in more of a unique manner, if they don't also hold a college degree, they may not fit into these traditional hiring molds and may find more of a challenge to kind of break into tech and get their first role in tech. Whereas someone who has a quantitative degree will have a much easier time getting in. I also noticed some of my classmates when I did my boot camp who had a degree at all versus no degree were able to sometimes land their first position easier just because of the biases and requirements of these companies, which is definitely something to consider when comparing these two options. There's also the potential for wasted money or debt if a job isn't landed. It can be less debt or less money because boot camps tend to be less expensive than traditional university. But I think this is also can be a con for traditional entry into tech if you're not able to properly utilize your resources during university and gain a job after graduation. This is also a potential. There just, I guess, is like a little bit less flexibility with this unique entry point. And also, in a boot camp, because it's shorter or just like a unique entry in general, there's less opportunities for social development and network depending on the circumstance. Both due to kind of like the shorter time frame, there just isn't enough time for social development and networking if you're just like kind of cramming in a bunch of knowledge into 6 months to a year. But also if you are someone who's older and has like a lot more responsibilities than the traditional university student, you'll have less time for these in general. And a lot of these boot camps or specific organizations don't have the same kind of breadth of services that a traditional university or college would have. But there's definitely ways to kind of overcome this and kind of supplement them into your journey into tech by going to things like meetups, hackathons, and kind of joining existing communities for people in tech, like both locally as well as kind of like nationally or internationally. Like a great place would be like at Major League Hacking by going to hackathons here or going to Global Hack Week to supplement your learning. I think this is also a great way to kind of like work on that social development and networking with other people in industry as well. So here are some case studies, kind of like examples of different people who are gaining entry in tech into untraditional ways. And then in my next slide, I'll be talking about kind of people with more of a traditional background working in unique roles. So as you can see on the left, we have Alex, who is a self-taught JavaScript savant. He's a recent high school graduate with no formal CS education, but he discovered some open source web development curriculum when working at the city library. It was a pretty slow day, and he discovered this like open source web development curriculum, started tinkering around with it, and was really enjoying himself. So after finishing up this open source curriculum, building out a few websites, kind of making a portfolio, Alex discovered that the place that had this open source web dev curriculum also runs boot camps. Kind of like after further investigation, Alex thought, I don't really need to go through this boot camp. I already like taught myself all the material anyway. I don't really see a point in that. He did apply for the apprenticeship program the boot camp runs like locally within his city, and he was accepted for an 8-month placement at a local bank. So these things are often called apprenticeships or internships. It's a short-term kind of ability to gain practical experience. So after this, he was accepted in the placement, quit his job at the library, and began working for a local bank as a software developer. And then after this 8-month placement at the bank, Alex impressed his boss and was able to land a full-time position as a software engineer, where he worked for a few years. And then afterwards was able to move companies to work at a tech company with a similar role. So it's kind of like a pretty untraditional entry in tech, but it shows that you're able to gain those practical skills on your own and then gaining some more supervised experience, you're able to move into a full-time role into a pretty traditional tech career of a software engineer. Someone said, good job, Alex. That is right. Good job. It's pretty impressive that you were able to not only find all the open source curriculum, but teach it to yourself to where you didn't even need to go through the boot camp that this place is offering and then getting accepted into the program. So here on the right, we have Amelia, who is an art major, and while working in a class it was focused on digital art, she was working with some creative coding. So there's this framework called p5.js. If you're familiar, it's like a digital art kind of creative coding platform. And there's an assignment in one of her classes to work on this. And while tinkering around with this, she just began to experiment, learn a little bit more, and eventually found out about UI UX design, which she thought was kind of like the perfect blend between her background in art. She had typically done pottery, but was interested in graphic design, kind of like the more digital art aspect of it, and eventually delved in a little bit more into coding and web design to enhance her designs. And then after graduation, her unique perspective and how she creatively approached problems was able to set her apart. And now she's a sought-after tech professional, kind of bridging that gap between design and development. And something I did not include about Amelia on screen is that while she was in her undergrad studies, as an art student, she completed an internship, specifically in UI UX design, so gaining some more practical experience in that manner. And she was able to eventually pivot some more into product design roles and thinking more about the product overall. So these are two people who kind of worked from an untraditional background into a traditional role in Alex's case, or more of a unique career with some traditional aspects in Amelia's case. So here are a few more case studies, and these are people who have more of a traditional background, but decided they wanted to be in more of a unique role, something that was a little bit more interdisciplinary and had more of their interest in mind. So on the left here, fun fact also about these profile pictures, because the two on these first two pages came with this Canva template. I just thought they could be like my two characters, the case study. But these two I actually generated using AI for these different characters for Jasmine and Jay. And I thought that was pretty fun, with how these ended up turning out. So that's a little fun fact. And that's also a way where I was able to automate away some of my manual tasks. So versus finding a picture that I thought fit with both of these characters, I just typed in woman in mid-30s, artistic, and within a few minutes I had a picture. So on the left here we have Jasmine, who is a data scientist who is transforming the newsroom. So after being laid off at Meta in late 2022, Jasmine said, I am done with big tech. I want out, and also wanted to move a little bit closer to home so she could be with her aging mother. And through this process, Jasmine was able to find a role as a data scientist at a university newsroom. And this was actually in the same town where her aging mother lives, which was great because she was able to move closer to her family, as well as gain a role that is a little bit more unique and was able to combine a bunch of her different interests, because Jasmine was also a part of the school newspaper and university, and really enjoyed her experience, but ended up going into data scientist role. So at this role, Jasmine was required to do a lot more than she did at Meta, and kind of a wider breadth of skill sets. So she had to do a lot of automating of a lot of outdated processes, which wasn't necessarily the case in big tech, and also analyzing a variety of different characteristics that were being underutilized and kind of identifying these characteristics as well as something that she had to do. In her previous experience, it was more she had to analyze the data, find some insights, and present about those, but she wasn't doing as much automation and kind of seeking out these statistics to begin with, because the newsroom was just completely underutilizing their data, not really doing too much with that outside of just kind of tallying up the stories for the year and a few basic placements. And kind of at the end, Jasmine was also tasked with explaining the technical aspects a lot more in depth, because she was only one of two technical people in the entire newsroom. The other person was a software engineer and who just kind of managed the newsroom website. So Jasmine had to explain not only like her whole process for how she like came about to like automate these like outdated process and kind of teach the reporters how to implement them into their day-to-day work, but also like what specifically these statistics mean and like what it means for the newsroom as a whole, which kind of challenged her to develop her communication and written skills more, that she just frankly didn't have to do as much in a big tech space where there was more technical people around, where she didn't have to spend as much time kind of answering questions and explaining that stuff. And Jasmine's work now kind of transformed the way the newsroom operates, and it saves reporters hundreds of hours spent on manual processes, the hundreds of hours over the course of a year, but hundreds of hours nonetheless. And these stats help the newsroom target specific underserved markets. So they're trying to reach a certain population as their university for something like recruiting, or they're trying to get information about research they're conducting out to a specific population. Jasmine is able to find more information on how to do that, and also like where they're having success in their news placements. And after a few months, she had such a huge impact at work. She was interested in, I guess, like just like writing more about her overall process and kind of expanding her written skill set. She really enjoyed her time writing articles in the past and kind of wants to get into it again. So she begins to work on converting all of her technical work into a case study on journalism and within newsrooms, and into more educational material at the Journalism Institute on the university's campus. And she's able to kind of partner with them to help non-technical journalists kind of implement some of these practices into their work, saving them hours of time, as well as just like being like more effective in the way they're targeting people to read their information and like better understand the information as well. And then also on the right after this, we have someone who came from a pretty traditional technical background in software engineering and moved into a very unique role of developer advocacy. So Jay is an ex-software engineer and now works as a developer advocate. After spending 7 years at DeepMind working on machine learning models, Jay decides that he wants to quit his job to work at a former colleague's machine learning documentation startup. He decided that I've had enough of large companies and wants to work for something a little bit fresher, more innovative, and is also very frustrated with the lack of documentation or just like outdated documentation. And he believes in his colleagues' ability to kind of like revolutionize this space, and has been working for quite a while at this company, decides he wants to take a risk. At this new company, he quickly takes on additional roles outside of engineering. He was originally brought on to develop some machine learning models. Jay's answering technical questions at business pitches and convincing engineers on why the documentation tool is helpful to begin with. So kind of being able to talk to them about his previous experiences in technical spaces and how this is a problem and how it can solve that problem, because he's seen it kind of in practice. And Jay decides that he wants to streamline this process further and begins to develop curriculum for developers to learn more about how to implement this into their existing like workflow. And he interviews successful implementation stories to kind of show people how this product has been utilized in the past, how it is successful, and kind of the things that they considered, like, do we actually need this product? And like how we went about like actually implementing it in a way that made sense for our company or our development environment. And then eventually, Jay builds out a hackathon challenge once the startup begins to sponsor MLH. So if you're familiar with MLH hackathons, sometimes we'll have sponsored categories from specific companies where they'll have you utilize as technology in your project. So at this ML like documentation startup, they have a specific product that they want developers to kind of test out and see what works and what doesn't and get a lot of feedback. And he builds out this hackathon challenge as well as some materials to help beginners to the technology understand what it is. So while Jay started out as just strictly a machine learning engineer, he's quickly moved into a developer advocate, working on kind of bridging the gap between developers and this product, and really kind of explaining to them like how it works, assisting with implementation, as well as making that content to like aimed at developers for both marketing purposes as well as like education and developer advocacy. So they're able to talk more about like what they want to see changed in the product, and then we can come back to this company and make those implementations themselves as an engineer, or bring it to the engineering team as they kind of begin to expand as a company. So here are just kind of like a few examples of how a unique career in tech can look like. This is kind of like a wide variety, but just a few instances. There's like a lot of different other niche, unique areas, and like a lot of other ways that you're able to enter tech from a non-traditional background as well. So here are some of those unique careers we talked about. Again, there's like a lot more unique careers outside of this, depending on like the specific niche. But here are a few with kind of like what the role is as itself, and then like what they'll do on the day-to-day. So someone earlier asked what a digital anthropologist is, and essentially what they're doing is they're studying the impact of technology on human behavior, on human culture, and they're analyzing how we as people interact with these technologies and how these interactions are shaping society. They typically have a social science background and maybe a little bit of a technical background, but are kind of more focused on how these technologies are changing how we move as a society, how this changes motivation, human psychology, that sort of thing, and kind of focusing on like the impact on culture and our behavior with access to these technologies, and also with a lot of people growing up with these technologies, well, like how that's changing people's behavior as they grow up. Kind of like what the day-to-day will look like for a digital anthropologist will, of course, vary depending on like what you're studying specifically within digital technology, but some key commonalities are watching out for these digital trends, doing user research on different applications, and like kind of trends within technology to see the psychology behind users, kind of doing user segmentation to see like what types of people are behaving in a certain way, like how is digital technology affecting culture as a whole, but also specific cultures. And then also kind of analyzing the social implications of technology, like how is it affecting different people? How are we doing as a society? Is this a net positive or a net negative? Are we kind of neutral with this? And just like asking more questions about kind of the social aspects of digital technology. And this, I guess, will come from someone who has more of a social science background with a little bit of technical experience, or someone who has kind of a heavy experience in both. And the next one is ethical hackers. This one I feel like is the most traditional out of like all like 5 of these. But these are also known as white hat hackers. And these are people who work to identify and rectify security vulnerabilities in different computer systems. So they're essentially reverse engineering things to see like where potential vulnerabilities lie, and then finding with their findings from kind of reverse engineering things and hacking into things where the vulnerability lies, and then kind of using that knowledge to strengthen those systems and protect those systems from like potential malicious attacks or upcoming malicious attacks too, based on their understanding of, I was able to break it in this way, let's fix it in this specific way. So like that's not possible anymore. So kind of the day-to-day for an ethical hacker will be a lot of different things depending on what they're testing or what they're implementing. But you'll see a lot of penetration testing, collaborative work with the cybersecurity teams to kind of improve those security measures based on like what they found when they were reverse engineering that security system. And we'll also spend a lot of time reading briefings and reading documentation to remain up to date and current on all the different cybersecurity trends, as well as like hacking techniques. Because if an ethical hacker is only versed in the hacking techniques of 2015, it will be a little bit useful to modern day, but you'll also need to have that knowledge from all the years in between, because there's a lot of trends that you won't be able to see if you're only reverse engineering it in a certain way. And then kind of the next one I'm going to dive into is augmented reality developers. So they work on like a lot of different types of application. It's a very creative technology career. You are doing a lot of coding, but artwork and design is also a very big part of your day-to-day. So if you do enjoy coding, but you also are a very creative person, this might be a good career for you. So what these AR developers do are create applications that overlay digital information onto the real world. And these can be applied to like a lot of different industries, such as gaming, education, healthcare, even manufacturing, because you're able to overlay those potential designs or developments onto the real world. You can use this both on like a tablet, a cell phone, or even VR goggles. The technology is pretty similar. And kind of what the day-to-day for AR developers look like is pretty similar to people who are designing and developing pretty like typical like applications. You'll spend prototyping out and building those AR applications as well as implementing your applications with cross-functional teams. It says T's, but that's meant to say teams. I'll fix that after this presentation, but implementing those applications on those teams and making sure that the people who are using it in places like education, healthcare, manufacturing are able to utilize it in a way that's helpful for them and is solving the problems they're facing. And then you'll see also we have developer advocate, which is what I talked about a little bit earlier with Jay, our case study. A developer advocate is also known as DevAd or DevAd. There's a few different ways to call someone a developer advocate. There's a few different titles based on this like specifics of what they're doing. But essentially, there's someone with a tech background who typically is a tech professional. And they kind of act as the middleman between a company or a tech platform and the developer community. So someone who's working on bridging the gap between the people who are developing an API at a company and the developers who are going to be using that application, whether that be in their hackathon project and open source contributions in a variety of different ways. And developer advocates really play a crucial role in making sure that collaboration, communication, and really understanding is present between developers and the organizations that they represent. Because if the developers are very unhappy with how an API is working or another technical project and they're not able to utilize it, they're not going to want to use it. They don't understand how it's working because the documentation is really bad. That's something that would be like really helpful for the people who are developing the application or the API or the company itself to know that they need to invest the time and resources to fix these problems, and then they'll have more developers in the community willing and wanting to work on these applications. So developer advocates have a lot of skills and their day-to-day looks different depending what kind of projects they're working on. But some of the key skills you'll see developer advocates need are community engagement, so being able to engage with that developer community. Technical support is a huge one, so understanding the technology you're working on, advocating for, and with the developers on. Content creation is another one. You'll oftentimes see developer advocates creating curriculum for developers, creating content, sometimes even leading workshops at hackathons or just like online in general. So that's like a really important part is being able to speak and create that content for developers. That cross-functional collaboration and being able to communicate clearly and work with people who work both as developers on the business side of things, as well as the logistics and operations. That's really important to be able to work with all those different types of stakeholders. Some other things you'll be needing in developer advocacy are the advocacy and feedback loop. So gaining that feedback from developers on what could be improved, what needs to be improved, if something's like really not working for them, and then advocating for them with those different stakeholders at the company or the institution where this technology is coming from is really important. And then also evangelization of the software, of the technology as a whole, and being able to talk about why it's a good thing to technologists who you're wanting to use it, and educating them on how to get started if they don't have any previous experience with your technology because it's relatively new, or just don't have any experience with that particular technology in general. Being able to kind of walk them through that and answer questions is a really important skill for the day-to-day of this job. And that's kind of like all I have to say about developer advocacy for now. Looks like we have a question. What are the criteria to become a developer advocate? It really depends on the company and kind of the project you're working on. Some places are looking for people who have kind of like a background or a career in the technology that they're working on. I've seen positions where they're looking for someone who has like a few years of software engineering experience and has experience kind of educating people, or maybe has a podcast or a newsletter they write about different technology in, and they'll bring them in to work on that technology. So, for example, if you have a company that has a Java product that's coming out, or some sort of like addition based in Java, they'll find a software engineer who's well versed in Java and also knows how to create content relating to technical things, or just kind of like those communication skills. And that's what they're looking for. Other times it's more marketing heavy. So having a combination of technical knowledge and marketing skills is important. It really depends based on the company and like this like specific job description and like the product they're working on. That'll kind of change the criteria. But in general, kind of the top 3 things that you'll need to become a developer advocate are technical expertise in whatever area, as well as like the ability to educate. Are you good at clearly speaking and answering questions on a technology? Are you able to create content that's educational, as well as being able to have those conversations and advocate for developers, both by asking them really good questions when you're in an environment where they're testing out the technology, but bringing back that feedback to the stakeholders of the company and being able to advocate for them when they're making changes or adjustments to the technology kind of as needed. And if you have that general skill set, I feel like you'll be able to find a position within developer advocacy that kind of aligns with what you're interested in. But of course, there aren't too many of these roles, as it's a pretty niche and kind of unique career. So sometimes if you have a certain background and you can kind of, I guess, focus on certain areas where the skills would be more transferable to that developer advocate role would be, I guess, a good idea if you're trying to get into it. All right, so the last kind of unique career I'm going to spotlight for today are data scientists who work outside of technology, outside the tech sector. So kind of as we talked about earlier, Jasmine is an example of a data scientist who doesn't work in tech. So your role here is going to be pretty similar to a data scientist who does work in tech, but it's going to be more focused on that specific domain knowledge. So whether it be you're working in a newsroom, so you need to have understanding of how journalism works, or you're working for the CDC and need to have understanding about healthcare and diseases. So just like having an understanding of that is like really important because not only you're able to understand the statistics, you're able to apply it to kind of the problem set in the specific like domain you're working in. And you'll be working to analyze the data and extract those insights, similarly to like in the tech industry. We're going to be using these insights to inform decision making in a lot of different fields. And you're going to spend more time kind of communicating with people on your team to explain kind of the technical aspects, as well as like how it can be applied, like how the findings can be applied to your job and like that specific company or project. So kind of a day-to-day for a data scientist outside of the tech industry is going to be cleaning, analyzing, and visualizing data, similar to kind of just like a regular data scientist in tech. You'll be building predictive models based on the business model or the overall business operation. Also, like not too unusual compared to a data scientist working in tech, but you'll also be focusing on that technical education piece to explain to people kind of like the background behind the statistics, how this data dashboard works, how to upkeep it. Maybe spend more time writing documentation and explaining your whole process to people. And you'll also spend a lot more time collaborating with different industry professionals who are professionals like in that specific domain, whether that be healthcare, government, education, finance, retail, a lot of different problem areas, and talking about how these insights can be applied because they have the knowledge and the background to apply these findings into the day-to-day, but they don't necessarily always understand what these statistics mean for the company. So they're able to kind of ask clarifying questions and explain what your findings are and kind of collaborate and bring your collective knowledge together to solve problems in a really efficient way to kind of progress society forward, which can be super exciting and interesting if you're really interested in the domain that you're working in or want to learn more about it. I think this can be like a really cool role for data scientists to take on if they're interested in learning more about healthcare or government or anything under the sun, to be honest. So if you're kind of entering into a unique tech career, whether that be because you're entering from a unique background or just like a kind of like a non-linear career path, you're going to face some challenges. The first challenge is there's sometimes can be more of a status quo in the tech industry, depending on how established a firm is. And kind of like how you can overcome these challenges is researching where you will be able to find hopefully fulfilling work and find the pipelines outside of the usual barriers to entry. You might find that if you're looking to work at a specific company, that's what GC is your goal company. Sometimes you have a different company where they hire a lot of people from, and you have kind of like a first first company, second company before the goal company, and there might be kind of more of an easier pipeline into entry at these different companies where you're able to gain like a lot of experience and work on interesting problems if you want, and then you can eventually end up at a company where you're aiming for, which is a goal company, or you might find that you're really satisfied and interested at the work you have at company one or two. And you'll find this by doing research on these different companies, the different types of problem sets and work you'll find here. And like just like doing like overall research, I feel like is really important to kind of implement yourself into an existing kind of status quo if you come from an untraditional tech background. And also if you're looking to move into more of an untraditional role, researching where you might find those niches in your specific interest. I think like another important area to kind of focus on overcoming challenges if you're looking to go into a unique kind of like problem set or a very like niche tech career is to speak on your accomplishments. A lot of people are like a little too humble sometimes, depending on the person, and aren't able to speak on what they accomplished and kind of the impact they had. But if you're able to speak very clearly on your accomplishments, not being like very like braggadocious about your accomplishments, but just like speaking honestly and plainly about like what you were able to accomplish, maybe putting numbers to that you have them, that'll kind of speak for itself. If you're looking to move into more of a unique career or coming from a unique background, and you're able to prove that you're qualified for this role and work on this problem because you've done similar things or the same thing in the past, and you have kind of the results to back yourself up. I think also advocating for others, whether it be because you like graduated from a boot camp and then became a software engineer, you want to advocate for people who are also going through that process, who were similar to you in the past, but also advocating for others who aren't necessarily like you, don't necessarily come from the same background as you, but you can see can definitely add something to your team, advocating for them, even if they don't come from a traditional background, or maybe looking to go into more of an untraditional role in tech, but advocating for those people and roles as you see fit and as you can kind of see like would have like a positive impact on that area. And some of the challenges you might find when you're pursuing a non-linear career path is that it's not going to be as stable or kind of like clear cut as the traditional career. And you might need to kind of like embrace that continual and like diverse learning. So being able to kind of have like a very like wide array of skill sets, whether that be both technically and non-technically, more of your kind of soft skills of good communication, your educational skills, your presentation skills, working on a team, that product thinking, as well as being able to kind of continually stay up to date on like whatever technology you're working in, I think is really important when navigating that non-linear career path, because you'll have those transferable skills in a bunch of different areas. And you'll also be able to kind of demonstrate your work in a portfolio if you have kind of like a wide like breadth of work in different arenas, and you're able to show kind of like the areas you're able to excel in. And I think that staying curious and like asking questions when you're working on these different areas is really important when you're working in a nonlinear career path, because you're able to kind of find niches that fit you a little bit better if you're curious and asking questions and researching things and researching new companies and trends, because you're able to kind of find those niches before they explode and become maybe a potential trend in the tech industry. But maybe because you asked specific questions and were doing research in a specific area, you're able to land a role in a specific area or problem set a little bit quicker. And I think also, like, if you're pursuing a nonlinear career path, kind of bouncing off of that, connecting yourself with communities and mentors in the spaces you're interested in is like absolutely crucial. You'll need to stay connected with people who kind of like have different perspectives, have different like connections, and are working on different problem sets. So you can keep up to date, and you're able to kind of stay inspired in like whatever area you're in. I know that personally, whenever I go to a hackathon and I get to see all the different projects that people are working on, it's always really inspiring and like energizing to me, even if you're like there for an incredibly long time, because you get to see all the different unique things people are working on, all the different arenas you can go into with tech. And also by connecting yourself with those communities and those mentors, you're able to ask questions and get like kind of like second opinions on your career moves. And you're able to also find potential connections into specific teams, like where you might know about a team that's hiring, or a specific company that's kind of like emerging a little bit quicker if you have connections or mentors who just know about those like expanding areas, or are able to kind of talk you through that process if like they themselves like work as an engineer or something at that company or on that team, which is a pretty common trend, not only within tech, but also kind of across like office jobs and office careers in general, is like staying connected with different people can prove to be very crucial in landing like new roles and finding that niche that you're interested in, because it's impossible to know about everything on your own at all times. So having those networks and those mentors who've been there before and can provide more insight and advice is really, really important in kind of navigating those challenges from a nonlinear career path. So now, if you have any questions about anything I talked about in the past hour and a half-ish, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you have any opinions on the case studies, if you have any questions on navigating unique tech careers, if you're interested in finding a good bootcamp, any questions in general about unique tech careers, navigating unique entry, I'd love to answer them. Someone asked, if I wanted to become a digital anthropologist from a traditional software engineering background, how might I do that? I think that you can kind of start by doing research on kind of like how social science and anthropology intersects with technology trends. I think as a software engineer, or if you're coming from a software engineering background, you're like really well positioned to kind of study how this technology is affecting people, because you know, like at a very granular level, how it works. But I think by kind of zooming out into more of the macro level of how these things are affecting people could be important. So I would like, I guess, like just like start by reading books on these different topics, maybe conducting your own case studies, and writing some research on your theories, and kind of doing that work in public or building in public, kind of like I mentioned earlier. So posting about kind of like your findings, books you read, kind of like how you found those to be, as well as connecting with people in the digital anthropology space, kind of studying the social impacts on technology, both through kind of communities, maybe following thought leaders in those spaces. I know that some like classes at university could be helpful for this as well. You can maybe take a class or two like at night or in the evenings on specifically the intersection of digital like technology with social science issues, like specifically in like the arena you're interested in. So if you're very interested on kind of how digital technology is affecting um, children or education, you can focus on like that intersection. But and then as you kind of like gain experience reading those books, doing case studies, and finding those insights, I feel like you'll find kind of like arenas to enter into that area. You might decide that you want to take more classes and maybe do graduate work in that area, or you might decide that you want to maybe pursue more of a untraditional or like practical route, and just by doing your own individual research and connecting with thought leaders and communities kind of outside of the academic space. But that's kind of my opinion. I haven't done any work in digital anthropology, but based on my knowledge, that's like I think a good kind of route to take. Someone asked, I mentioned that I enjoy writing, educating, um, writing and educating people and have technical skills. Would you think about applying for the developer advocate position? I think definitely so. I think kind of like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I don't want to be like a software engineer like long term, but I do see myself kind of working in more of a technical role the first few years of my career, and then pivoting into more of a like role where I'm kind of utilizing all those skills on a day-to-day basis. I can definitely see myself working as a developer advocate in a few years, like once I gain more experience in a specific area. But I don't think I'm quite to the point where I could work at a very small and kind of like up and coming company as a developer advocate, just because I don't think I have the full technical knowledge to support that. But I do think like at a larger company, I would like absolutely love to work as a developer advocate, learning from more experienced engineers and kind of working on all kind of like three of these aspects at once. I think it would be super interesting. I definitely could also see myself kind of working in a role that focuses more on user research or like product development. I find it like really interesting to conduct user interviews, user surveys, and like asking those questions, doing research on that, and utilizing my like writing skills and um, like educating people in the problem space that way. But still kind of like exploring a few different avenues where I can kind of combine my interest and skill sets and do a role that's not completely technical, but still focuses on tech a fair amount. I can definitely see myself kind of following a similar career path to Jasmine or Jay of the presentation, and starting out in a more, I guess, traditional technical role and moving more into a unique or kind of like emerging problem space farther down the line, because I do enjoy the technical aspect a lot, as well as like writing and the education aspect too. All right, if there's no more questions, I'm gonna dive more into some resources I have for y'all. Um, and we'll like finish up because there's not too much more time and I don't want to put into the next coach's streaming time. But if you're interested in learning more about what I talked about, I know it's like a lot of information and there's like a lot of different avenues, but here are some additional resources for learning, maybe getting into a unique career in tech if that's what you're interested in. So a great way is to listen to the State of the Developer Education podcast. This is actually run by one of the co-founders of MLH, John. It's really interesting to listen to what all the guests have to say on this podcast and their conversations. I love listening to it. And if you're interested in developer education or developer advocacy, I think that's a great way to kind of stay up to date and learn more kind of on the industry. Kind of following that, if you're interested in becoming a developer advocate, there's an article on what one is and how to become one. if you're interested in kind of looking at the intersection between government and technology, there's this cool fellowship called the Coding It Forward Fellowship. I will preface that this is based in the US. There probably are citizenship requirements for that or something like that. But it focuses on like government, and they'll place you with a governmental organization within the US to work on a specific tech problem. They have everything from cybersecurity to product design to software engineering, and a few other roles, I think, as well. They run it, I think, every summer, and they do some cool programs outside of the fellowship as well, like focused on government and technology, which I think is really interesting. There's also this article on how to reverse engineer your career, which is essentially the practice of looking at what kind of lifestyle you want to have in addition to what you're good at and what you're interested in to kind of form a career that's sustainable long term, because you're able to work in an interesting problem space while also working in a career that kind of meshes well with your lifestyle. If you need more flexibility because you have family obligations, or like you, I guess, like just like want to go like do some traveling or have like flexibility in that aspect, that's something to consider when you're looking at potential careers. Or if you have specific times like when working like works better with your life, that's something to consider like as like a lifestyle consideration when you're kind of reverse engineering your career. So considering like all three of those, and then kind of like working backwards based on what kind of things you're looking for in your lifestyle, what kind of things you're good at, and what you're interested in. And then based on those, working backwards to find a role you think would be well suited for you. On the right, I have an article that's talking about startups that are redefining industries and how smaller organizations and more unique places can redefine industry and create tech trends, which I found to be pretty interesting. There's an article on the role of data science in healthcare, which is kind of like I talked about, a data scientist working outside of tech. I have an article on getting a job in AR and kind of like AR development. And then lastly, I have a link to LaunchCode, which is a place to where, like, this is a link to a boot camp, which is completely free, which is unique to boot camps. They also run an apprenticeship program similar to Alex's Path, where you can apply for that as well. All of these links will be in the PowerPoint that I will have a bit.ly for in a second. So thank you to everyone who came out to this awesome conversation on unique careers in tech. If you're interested in looking at these slides and clicking on maybe one of those links I have in the resources, go to the bit.ly. It's just bit.ly/emerging-eng, which stands for engineers. But this is on the screen. I'll leave it up for a little while so y'all are able to access it. And there'll be links to that in the presentation if you want any of those resources. Awesome. This was a great conversation. I loved getting to answer questions and talk about unique tech careers with y'all. And I hope to see you at some other Global Hack Week streams for the rest of the week. Hope you have a great rest of your Global Hack Week. Yeah, thank you. See you later.